Welcome to Jasher in Genesis Week 3. I'm Pastor Robert Lee, and I'm looking forward to sharing this time with you. We're going to jump back in Jasher chapter 5 with some readings from the Nephilim Agenda and the Book of Jubilees and, of course, the Bible. There's a lot of moving parts going on right now, so I want to make sure everybody keeps together on this. Let me catch up here. So in Jasher chapter 5, all the men of the line of Adam are starting to pass away and graduate, I call it, to heaven. Enosh, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, and then, of course, in verse 6, God warns of the coming flood. We know this is in chapter 6 as well. I'll read the scripture just to recap it. The earth, in verse 11, the earth was depraved and putrid in God's sight, and the land was filled with violence, desecration, infringement, outrage, assault, and lust for power. This is from the Amplified. And God looked upon the world and saw how degenerate, debased, and vicious it was, for all humanity had corrupted their way upon the earth and lost their true direction. Sounds a little familiar today. And God said to Noah, I intend to make an end to all flesh, for through men the land is filled with violence, and I will destroy them in the land. Make yourself an ark. So he tells him what to do and how to build it, tells him exactly the instructions, and that he will establish a covenant. Now let's go back into Jasher chapter 5. God warns of the flood in verses 6 through 8, and he says, I will give you a period of 120 years that he has to tell men to return back to him. And if you will turn to me and forsake your ways, I will turn away from this evil. And Noah and Methuselah spoke all the words of the Lord to the sons of men day after day, constantly speaking to them. How many of us are witnessing to people in this earth day after day, day after day, day after day? We can never stop as born-again believers preaching and teaching the word of God to those who need to hear. But the sons of men in 10 would not hearken to them nor incline their ears. They were stiff-necked, very familiar today with people like that. And the Lord granted them a period of 120 years. Noah and the son of Lamech refrained from taking a wife in those days to have children, because surely now that God will destroy the earth, why should I have children? Noah was a just man and was perfect in his generation, and the Lord chose him to raise up a seed from his seed from the face of the earth. And the Lord said, take a wife and have children, for I have seen your righteousness before me in this generation. Now, I find this to be super cool, because today, this probably wouldn't go down this way. Here we go. And Noah went and took a wife. He chose Naamah, the daughter of Enoch. So this is his aunt. Okay, she was 580 years old. Okay, grasp that. Noah was 498 years old. Excuse me? So she is literally about 82 years older than him. Now, back then, I'm sure they were all smoking hot, good-looking ladies, and so the age made no difference. Boy, today, try that, and it's just not going to happen. So I find that to be humorous about back in the time. So right away, Japheth was born, and then Shem was born, and then Ham was born. And he was 502 years old during this, when these boys grew up, okay? Then Lamech, Noah's father, passed away, all right? And then he lived 777 years, which is the number of perfection. And then again, throughout, Noah and Methuselah stood strong and continued to preach what we call the gospel back then, the turning back to God. Peradventure, the men of the earth and women would turn back to God. But in 24, they would not listen and they refused. And then the Lord said, the end of all flesh is come. I will destroy the earth. And then again, he builds the ark. We won't get into all that. But in the 595th year, Noah commenced to make the ark. He made it in 5 years. Noah took the 3 daughters of the son of Methuselah for the wives of his sons. And then Methuselah died at 969 years old. Remember, you have Adam, Methuselah, and Noah as the 3 connecting names from the beginning of time past the flood. Remember those 3, all right? So now let me jump into something very quickly as we look at resources here. Let's recap again this is regarding what God did. He sent a sword into the presence of the Nephilim and their descendants, and they began to kill each other until many were felled by the sword. And their fathers were witnesses of their destruction. After this, they were bound in the depths of the earth during the great condemnation, and he destroyed all wherever they were. There was not one left, and he judged them. This judgment is ordained in the heavenly tablets of righteousness. All right, so in verse 19 in Jubilee, it says, "For all who corrupted their ways and their thoughts before the flood, no person was acceptable to God except Noah. His sons were saved in deference to him, and those God kept from the waters of the flood on his account. For Noah's heart was righteous in all his ways." He builds the ark, and then in the 6th year, all the animals come in and the Lord closes it. Now let's read what happens in back to Jasher. In chapter 6, it says, God says to Noah, basically, "Go to the ark, I will gather all the animals, that they will come and surround the ark." In verse 2, "Seat yourself by the door of the ark, and all those that will place themselves before you, such that come and crouch before you or kneel, you shall take and deliver into the hands of your sons, who will bring them to the ark. Those that stand before you in defiance, you shall leave." Now, I find that to be very interesting. There's got to be a parallel as to why this potentially was very important here. A lot of the animals had been twisted, and the chimera happened by the enemy, by demons, when they were mixing the blood of animals and crossbreeding. Those crossbreeded animals were not going to be allowed. They did not have the order that God gave, and so they were not going to be allowed on the ark. So this occurred in verse 4. Noah went to the front, and those that crouched he let in, those that stood he left. And Noah saw this and wondered greatly. And then two came to Noah in verse 9 in chapter 6. But from the clean animals and the clean fowls, he brought 7 couples as God commanded him, because those were going to be for the sacrifice. On that day, the Lord caused the whole earth to shake. Now, the door was closed. It says in Jasher 5:23 that the Lord closed it from the outside, and then the Lord opened 7 floodgates of heaven, and he opened the mouths of the foundations of the great deep, 7 mouths in number. So there were 7 openings to the firmament around the earth, and then 7 openings from inside the earth, where the water came like this around the earth. That's how quickly it flooded, and over the 40 days and 40 nights. And it says the floodgates began to pour down water from the heavens 40 days, and the fountains of the deep also sent up waters, and the whole world was full of water. And the water increased on the earth, and the waters rose above the high mountains. So I should have looked this number up, but the Himalayas have got to be 29,000 feet high or something like that, or even higher. That's a lot of water. So you have the flood really covering every inch of any hint of dry land. And so you can see the confusion and the disarray that it caused to Noah and his sons and their wives, when they realized, whoa, where are we going? What's going to happen here? We're going to get into that here in a second. And the water covered the face of the earth for 5 months, which is 150 days, and it went and rested on Ararat eventually. And then the fountains of the great deep were closed, the floodgates of the heaven were restrained, and then the waters began to dissipate. So let's move into back to Jasher. Okay. Now, meanwhile, it says here that on that day in Jasher 6 verse 11, on that day the Lord caused the whole earth to shake, the sun darkened, the foundations of the world raged, and the whole earth was moved violently, and lightning flashed and thunder roared, and all the fountains in the earth were broken up, because they had never experienced rain before. And God did this mighty act to terrify the sons of men, so there would be no more evil. And at the end of the 7 days, in the 600th year in the life of Noah, the waters flooded the earth. And again, let's get to the part now. When all these men knocked on the door of the ark or screamed at Noah and said, listen, we want to go back to the Lord now. We get it. We understand. Well, Noah basically says in 22, hey, you saw the whole, now you see the trouble of your souls in 22. You wish to return to the Lord. Why didn't you do that during the 120 years which the Lord gave you? Today on this earth, when you witness to somebody, hey, they don't have 120 years. Some may have 1 year. Some may have a week. You've got to have a sense of urgency when you're witnessing to people, because you don't know the day or hour that God's going to call them home. So be very intentional with your witnessing to people in a very loving way, of course, but make sure they know that you cannot dilly-dally on this. This is not something you can mess around with. So as the sons of men approached to break into the ark, they could not because of the rain. The Lord sent all the beasts of the animals that stood around the ark, and the beast overpowered them and drove them from that place, and every man went his way and scattered themselves. So again, I love this in Jasher 6:28. And the oak and the ark floated above the face of the waters, tossed from the waters, that all the living creatures within were turned about like pottage in a cauldron. That's a pretty neat little explanation there. And great anxiety seized all the living creatures, because they thought the ark would be broken. And all the creatures were terrified. The lions roared, the oxen lowed, the wolves howled, and so forth. And they all lamented in their own language. And Noah and his sons cried and wept in their troubles. And they were greatly afraid, because they thought they were at the gates of death. But Noah prayed. 31, but Noah prayed. When you're in a crisis, what's the first thing you do? You pray. You say, God, there's a situation here. I need you to step up here and do exactly what it is you're supposed to do, which is step up and show yourself strong on my behalf. And he says, Lord, light up your countenance towards us and be gracious to us and redeem us. And the Lord listened to the voice of Noah, and he remembered him. And a wind passed over the earth, and the waters were still, and the ark rested. Remember when Jesus on the Sea of Galilee did the exact same thing? Pretty incredible. When the disciples were crossing over, and Jesus came and met them, and he said, peace, be still. Well, Jesus was there at this time as well. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain was restrained, and that ark rested on Ararat. And Noah opened the windows of the ark, and we know what happened in Genesis chapter 8. As they diminished, he sent forth a raven going to and fro to find the dry land. Then he sent a dove to see if the waters decreased. But the dove found no resting place, and they returned to the ark. And so he waited another 7 days and put the dove out again. Then the dove came back with a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew the waters have subsided from the land. But he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, but she didn't return. That means she was able to nest. And in the 601st year of Noah's life, again, this is in Genesis 8, verse 13, the waters were drying. Noah removed the covering of the ark, and the surface of the ground was drying. And then God said to Noah, go with you, your wife, and your sons, and their wives, bring forth every living creature, all the birds, that you may be abundantly free on the land, and be fruitful and multiply. There's that same phrase again, be fruitful and multiply. And so now we get to chapter 7 of Jasher. I'm going to go back and read one little thing that I did mean to do a few moments ago. Let's hit that for a second. Noah took everything the fallen watchers and their offspring threw at him and remained untainted. How many of you are being bombarded with the chance to sin? You're saying, yes, I'm just not going to participate in that. Be encouraged when it seems everyone else has gone the way of Cain, because God is looking for those who remain faithful. God is looking for those he can bestow grace on to overcome. And that's what Noah did. He was very much like his great-great-grandpa Enoch. Okay? All right? Now, Noah remained faithful, but after the flood, we have a story to share that's not his best moment. Now, chapter 7 begins by sharing the descendants of Japheth, Ham, and Shem. We won't read that. That's something you can read on your own. But there is an important point we want to bring up in verse 19. Remember, because Shem is the line of Jesus. He's the seed that brings him. Shem had Apishad, and then he had Shelach, and then he had Eber. And Eber had 2 children, one Peleg, for in his days the sons of men were divided, and in the latter days the earth was divided. The second was Joktan, meaning that the days of the lives of the sons of men were diminished and lessened. So slowly but surely the lifespan of humanity continued to shrink down to what God said, 120 years or so. Now, let's read. I'm going to read something that is not covered, sadly, in Jasher, but I think it is very important to take a moment on. And this, of course, is in Genesis, so let's definitely hit this. And this is sad to me, but again, this is why it's important to note. Okay. And this is in Jubilee 7, but it's also in Genesis chapter 9. Okay. Yep. All right. And, Noah planted a vineyard, just like any good man would do. He made wine and they enjoyed it. It was good. But then one day in the evening, he went into his tent and being drunk, he laid down and slept. Now, why he chose to get drunk, I don't know. Full disclosure, I've never done that. I don't find anything redeeming about it. However, that's what he did, but he was uncovered. Somehow his clothes were off, or he may have taken them off to go to bed. But Ham saw his father naked and went out and told his 2 brothers and ridiculed his father to his 2 brothers. Shem took garments with Japheth, and they went backwards and placed them over the body of their father. Noah, key phrase here, Noah awoke from sleep and knew all the abuse that his younger son had done to him. And he walks out immediately and curses Ham, saying, "Cursed be Canaan, an enslaved servant he shall be for his brothers." But then he blessed Shem, and he blessed Japheth. Ham knew his father had cursed him and his younger son, and he was displeased that he had cursed him. And Ham parted from his father, and he took his children and left. He built himself a city. Now, we're going to get back to that. But the sadness here is that Ham made a decision to sin. Now, I'm going to read something that's interesting. Because of these 3 things came the flood on the earth. The fornication that the watchers committed against the law of their ordinances, when they went whoring after the daughters of men and took themselves wives of all they choose. And they made the beginning of uncleanness on the earth. They had sons, the Nephilim, and they were dissimilar, and they devoured one another, and the giants killed the Nephi, and the Nephil killed the Iljo, which killed mankind, which killed one another. After this, they sinned against the beast and the birds, and all that moved and walked on the earth, and much blood was shed, and men continually desired only what was useless and evil. That's today, folks. I run into a lot of people and unfortunately see the news where there's just evil, 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 evil. The killing of someone on a subway, on a train, shooting Charlie Kirk, who's a martyr for Christ. Totally unacceptable. The demons are ramping up what they're doing. Why? Because they have no choice from their perspective, because they know that God is going to lock them down at the end of the 7 years of the end times and the tribulation. So Noah says, "For when you were left, I, you and my sons and everything that entered into the ark, I saw your works before me, that you do not walk in righteousness. I see the demons have begun their seduction against you, Ham, and your children. And I fear for your behalf, that after my death you will shed the blood of men on the earth, and we'll get destroyed once again. So Ham was very concerned about his son. And again, that is very, very, very unfortunate what happened here. So, all right. Now, let's go back and read some commentary on what happened with Noah. Clearly, and it's unfortunate to say, but clearly Ham sodomized his father, and that's very, very gross, but very much what happened. I'm going to read some, when Noah gets drunk, the door opens again for sin. When everything was well in the world, Noah does the unthinkable. He gets drunk. This was all Satan needed to gain access to the promised seed and turn the battle back to his favor. Instead of winning the war, the flood was just another battle. Now the Nephilim would have a new host soul. Remember, spirits never die. And so these demonic spirits had to find bodies to be a part of, so they could be served. So he had to regroup and start again. All right? Cursed be Canaan. Observing the incapacitated state of Noah, Ham does the unthinkable. He opens the door to the most desirable act of the roaming Nephilim, sexual perversion. Some suggest Ham had homosexual relationships with his father. That can be deducted by observing the activities of the offspring of Canaan, in Sodom and Gomorrah especially. He uncovered his father's nakedness, implies that he had some kind of issues there. Definitely sexual misconduct took place. The Bible says that as a man thinks in his heart, so he acts. And out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I think for sure Ham got caught up in a moment of lust, which a demon whispered in his ear, establishing a doorway for a spirit of lust to enter him and use his body to carry out shameful acts. Once embodied, Ham had no means of deliverance back then. Therefore, his offspring would carry and increase the iniquity of sexual perversion to its fullest capacity. Clearly, a demon enticed him to come and lead with them for dominion, power, and pleasure in the new world, and they lied to him. That's the best thing they've got. Clearly, the Canaanites set up sexual altars to worship sexual spirits, and there was lots of sexual activity back in those days. And so the whole intent was to corrupt the bloodline. Remember, you have the Canaanites, the Philistines, and many of them had cities. All these places were harbingers for Nephilim activity. The cursed line of Ham seems to wholly give themselves over to the Nephilim agenda. The blessed sons of Noah, Shem, and Japheth started well, but began a slow downward spiral into idolatry years later. Between the line of Noah and Abraham, the giants and the tyrants begin to appear again. And a particular interest is a man named Nimrod. Now, we're going to be talking about him presently, but he became the king. From Ham's son Cush came Nimrod. The scripture says he began to be a mighty one on the earth. Now, let's go back to Jasher chapter 7. And it says here in verse 23, actually, let me go up one step. Peleg's son, Yen, had a young man named Serug, had a son named Nahor, who had Terah. And Terah was 38 years old, and he then had Haran and Nahor. Another Nahor, okay? So Terah is Abram's father. Terah served as a prince for Nimrod. See the connection. It's going to come back to be very important. And it says this, Cush, the son of Ham, the son of Noah, took a wife, and she bare him a son named Nimrod, saying, at that time the sons of men began to rebel and transgress against God. It's amazing how a woman, a mother, whose great-grandparents or let me rephrase, whose grandparents were Noah, and Noah's wife quickly realized what was happening. So she names him Nimrod. The child grew up and his father loved him, and the garments of skin which God made for Adam and his wife when they went out of the garden were given to Cush. For after the time of Adam and his wife, the garments were given to Enoch, the son of Jared. When Enoch was taken to God, he gave them to Methuselah, his son. At the death of Methuselah, Noah took them and brought them to the ark where they were with him. And after going out, Ham stole those garments from Noah and his father, and he took them and hid them from his brothers. Just imagine, had you been Noah, what would you have taken on the ark? I know that they had the rod of God, which drove Adam and Eve out of the garden. I know that they had the skins and the tablets in the book of Enoch, the book 1. I know they had those things, because there's definitely prized possessions that Noah was going to take on the ark that would be important for history. 28, when Ham began his firstborn son Cush, he gave those garments to him in secret, and they were with Cush for many days. Cush also concealed them from his sons and brothers. When Cush begot Nimrod, he gave him those garments through his love for him. And Nimrod grew up, and when he was 20 years old, he put on those garments. In 30, Nimrod became strong when he put on the garments, and God gave him might and strength, and he was a mighty hunter on the earth. In the field, he hunted animals, he built altars, and he offered them on the animals before the Lord. So he did some good things, but then he went bad. Nimrod strengthened himself and rose up against his brothers and fought the battles of his brothers against all their enemies around about. That's amazing. We haven't even been, my goodness, we haven't been but maybe about 200 years, maybe 230 years, and everybody's already fighting each other. It's just crazy. Talk about one dysfunctional family. Reminds me of the Hatfields and McCoys and many other scenarios in human history. It's amazing how we just want to fight each other and say, you're wrong, I'm right, and then go to war and go to battle. Just craziness, just nuts, absolute nuts. So it says, back to Jasher 7:33, it became current in those days when a man ushered forth that he had been trained up for battle, he would say, like God did to Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter, who succeeded in battles, may God strengthen us and deliver us. So when Nimrod was 40 years old, so we're not talking 20 years later, there was a war between his brothers and the children of Japheth. And Nimrod went forth and he assembled the sons of Cush and their families, 460 men, and hired friends and acquaintances of 80. And they said, don't be alarmed. We've got this battle. We're going to win. And when he did, he took some of Japheth's children as security. He basically created them as slaves. And they asked, all the people asked Nimrod to become king over them, and they placed a crown on his head. Okay, and then now he realizes who he is. He lived in Shinar, which is where a famous story we're fixing to hit that day comes up, and we're gonna pause there in a little bit and go back to that. So Nimrod wasn't a mighty hunter of game; rather, he hunted the souls of men. The souls of disembodied Nephilim could possess. Nimrod began to build cities as places of habitation for wicked and unclean spirits. And then, of course, the tower is going to be built shortly. He exchanged the souls of men to the Nephilim for the right to rule over them. Nimrod was obsessed with establishing a kingdom that God cannot destroy, and he was intent on destroying the promised seed. Josephus wrote in the works of Josephus, Nimrod persuaded mankind not to ascribe their happiness to God, but to think that his own excellency was the source of it. And as soon as things changed into a tyranny, thinking there was no other way to wean men from their fear of God by making them rely on his own power, he threatened them. Another writer said, from the foundation of the world, none was ever found like Nimrod, powerful in hunting and in the rebellion against the Lord. He was powerful in hunting and the wickedness, for he was a hunter of the sons of men. He said, depart from the judgment of the Lord and listen to the judgment of Nimrod. As Nimrod, the strong one, strong in hunting and the wickedness before the Lord. The Chaldee, paraphrase in 1 Chronicles 1:10 said, Cush begat Nimrod, who began to prevail in wickedness, for he shed innocent blood and rebelled against Jehovah. Nimrod was the founder of Babylon, which partook of his character as the great antagonist of God's truth and God's people. We cannot fail to see in Nimrod Satan's first attempt to raise up a human universal ruler of men. And there have been many subsequent attempts like Nebuchadnezzar, Alexander, Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, many, many others. All right. All right, so we'll pause there on that. So what happens next, of course, is they build the Tower of Babel, and we're going to save this for the next time. All right. And as we conclude, we're going to look back in Genesis and see. I want to make one point about the rainbow, and I did forget to bring that up, and that's okay. Let me pull that up here for a second. Let's see here. And of course, God is a God of covenants. It says, he gave to Noah and his sons a sign that there should not be a flood on the earth again. He set his bow, a rainbow, in the cloud as a sign of the eternal covenant, that there should never again be a flood on the earth to destroy it all the days of the earth. I believe, and I've heard this before, that this rainbow comes back from behind the throne room of God, from behind his throne. And that bow is something that he can set off anywhere. Of course, the angels, I believe, are as the book of Enoch states, are constantly making sure that rainbow shows up after rain comes up, reminding us that the rain's not going to yield to another flood. It's just a temporary situation. So, so again, that's found in Genesis chapter 9, verse 11, 12, and 13. God says, I will establish my covenant with you, never to flood the earth again. And this token is the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature. I set my bow in the cloud, that it be a token and the sign of the covenant. Now, this is interesting. When we get to heaven, we're going to see some pretty amazing colors that we have never seen here on earth. Never. I cannot wait to see these colors, because they're going to be very, very interesting. I mean, our eyes cannot even begin to express the vividness of heaven. I know people who have been have mentioned a lot of things about it, but I cannot wait to see these different colors. And 14 says, and it shall be that when I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant and pledge that I will never destroy the earth with a flood again. When the bow is in the clouds, I will look upon it and remember my covenant between me and you. And God said, this rainbow is a token of my pledge, which I have established between me and all flesh. So again, just very unique how everything God does has a purpose, a reason, an intent. And for me, that is very, very exciting, because it shows that God really, obviously being omniscient, but he thinks everything through. And that's very important. So this will conclude week 3, and we'll pick up next week with the story of the Tower of Babel. Until next time, thank you for joining Rooted in Yeshua. Shalom.